Thank you, everybody. I think we might as well begin, kind of a rolling start here. My name is Mark Breen. I'm a member of the school committee and the chair of the school building committee and a longtime town meeting member. I'm also the parent of 3 Walpole High School graduates. And we're here tonight, to discuss the school building project. So the school building committee is made up of representatives of the school committee, the school administration, member of the select board, the town administration, members of the finance committee, the permanent building committee, community members at large. I'm sure I'm missing somebody in here as well. And we've also involved Compass Project Management and TAP Architects as well. You'll hear from Dr. Goff, Brian Jarvis from from Compass Project Management, and Chris Blesson from TAP as the evening goes on, as well as Mr. Andy Zatoli from Natick Middle School, pardon me. I'd like to make a comment about my own personal experience as far as building projects like this go, because this is, sort of something as a member of the school committee that I've taken, kind of an extra interest in because I've been through a building project. I teach at King Philip High School in Rentham, and we've been in a new building now for about 13 years. And as I recall, it's about 11 years ago that my oldest daughter was going in her first tour at Bird Middle School. And as I walked through the building, it occurred to me that Bird was in worse condition at that time, I felt, than the school that we had just torn down. So that's kind of a mile-high position as to where I come from as far as this project goes, without getting into the weeds of the particulars. But tonight, we're trying to make the case that Walpole needs to move forward with a new middle school project. And again, with that, we'll be hearing from Mr. Brian Jarvis, then Dr. Goff, and others. So I'll turn it over to Brian Jarvis if I could.
Thanks, Mark. As Mark mentioned, I'm Brian Jarvis. I'm project director for the Walpole project for Compass Project Management. Working again for the town of Walpole. I was project manager on the police, fire, and council on aging projects, and have presented a few times in the past related to this project. So I'm glad that you all could join us tonight and get a more updated information as to where we currently stand on the project and also some of the big decisions that are coming up in the near future. Quick agenda for tonight. We'll go over briefly the project timeline at a very high level, the current status of where we stand with the project. We're going to focus tonight's discussion really around the possibility of a consolidated enrollment, meaning one middle school for the town of Walpole. That is one solution path that is being considered for this project. In particular, we'll focus on some of the educational aspects of a consolidated school, how to build connectivity in a larger school, and some of the financial aspects of a consolidated school versus maybe a single bird project. Also give you the information at the end related to how to stay informed and involved with the project, where you can go to get more information, the types of information that is out there, in ways that you can email questions or get in contact with the project team. And then ideally leave as much time as possible for some of your questions and comments at the end of the presentation. As was mentioned previously, if you have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to put them into the chat. That way we'll have a log of all the questions that were asked, and we'll make our best effort to get to all of them at the end, as well as take any new questions at that time. So quickly, some of you might have been on previous forums or information sessions related to the overall project timeline. So this is the timeline for the total project at a very high level. The items highlighted in blue are part of the feasibility and schematic phase, which is the current phase of the project. That is where we're coming up with feasible options, and then at some point narrowing that down to a preferred solution option for the town, and then taking that option through schematic design, which equates to about roughly 30% of the total design of a project. The goal is to get to a preferred solution by the end of this coming February, so roughly 3 months from now. That is the solution that the town feels would be the most cost-effective and educationally beneficial solution for the town. That's the solution that we would provide to the MSBA, saying the town wants to move forward with this solution, and then if approved, would move into schematic design. In the schematic design phase, that's where we'll set a preliminary budget, scope, and schedule for the project that will get approved by the MSBA. And that is the scope and budget that will get presented at the fall town meeting in 2021. So that is the budget that the town will vote on and determine their borrowing and everything else associated with it. A key thing to remember about MSBA projects is that they make the town approve the total project funding at that point in time. It's not on like other projects where you might have the opportunity to complete the design and bid it and get hard bids in hand. You actually be going to town meeting with a solid estimate, but at the schematic design phase, and all the total project costs go along with it. If the project is approved to move forward in the fall of 2021, design will start, and that will last about a year, taking us into the fall of 2022, and possibly with construction starting in the late winter of 2022, early 2023. The construction timeline will vary based on what is ultimately what the solution is. It could be as quickly as 18 to 24 months, depending on a renovation or something to the existing burn, and up to possibly up to 30 months if it's a phase solution, a new building, that might have a lot of moving parts and phases to it. The earliest that as a student class could get in there, we're anticipating right now would be the fall of 2024, which I think equates to this year's second graders. And that could change a little bit depending on what the solution is. So that's the overall schedule quickly. The current phase, as I mentioned, is the feasibility schematic phase, which was the light blue items highlighted on that schedule. This aligns with kind of the process that the MSBA makes the town and district go through. Some of you have probably seen this. We've updated this as of yesterday. So yesterday, November 23rd, we submitted the preliminary design plan to the MSBA, which is basically the initial information gathering that the town and district does for all the feasible sites and all the possible option scenarios that could be looked into. It looks into the existing conditions of the existing buildings. It looks into certain sites on town. It looks into what might fit for different size schools, what a renovation, what a add renovation size might look like on those particular sites. Figures out how much space is needed for the new program, the program for middle school in Walpole, and equates that to square footage and tries to fit that on the site. And then you move into what is called the preferred schematic report, which is where you start to narrow those options down. So there were no decisions in this preliminary design plan. It was just getting all the options off to the MSBA. And we'll start the process of narrowing that down as we move forward, as I said, through the end of February, culminating with a schematic design report at the end of this coming summer prior to next fall's town meeting. And quickly, just a little more detail on those deliverables. As I mentioned, the preliminary design program, which went in Monday, had these elements. The educational program, which was the district's view of how they deliver middle school education currently, how they plan to do that in the future, and what is needed from a facility in order to deliver that. How that program turns into spaces, the quantity and square footage of spaces, and what is needed to support that program. Evaluating the existing conditions and facilities and see how they match up against that program and what needs to be done to address them, possible site options, and then the preliminary evaluation of scenarios. We talked about this at past community forums. There were 7 scenarios required by the MSBA, and the MSBA allowed this project to look at 2 different enrollments for Walpole, one for 450 single school, so meaning a Bird middle school only project, or recognizing the need that both middle schools in Walpole or a need of attention allowed the town to look at a possible consolidated enrollment of 905 students. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that tonight. So all of that information, all of those initial concepts, again, no decisions, just concepts, and all this preliminary information went into the MSBA Monday. That's under their review. We'll get some comments back in the next week or two, respond to those comments, and we'll move forward in this preferred schematic report, which is the current phase that we're in, highlighted in yellow. The key decision, though, in preferred schematic is one of the early decisions that we have to make on the project. It's related to that enrollment discussion, which we're going to focus on tonight. What size school makes the most sense for Walpole from a middle school perspective? Sticking with 2 individual schools or possibly consolidating into one middle school. From there, the options that we currently have on the table obviously get narrowed, whether we go single school or consolidated school. We'll continue to shortlist the possible concept options, get into more and deeper evaluations and analysis of what concept makes the most sense, and finally arrived at a preferred solution. And the goal is, as we mentioned, is to get to that preferred solution stage by the end of this coming February. So a lot of work to be done in the next few months, and then we'll move into schematic design throughout the summer. So quickly on the enrollment discussion and decision, which is the first big decision we need to make, and then I'll turn it over to Dr. Goff to talk a little bit more about the finer points. As I mentioned, the MSBA is allowing the town and the district to look at 2 enrollment options, one for a single bird project of 450 students and one for a possible combined project of combining all 6 through 8 students in the district. Doing 2 separate projects is not an option from the MSBA's perspective. So it's not as if we have a decision that we can do, oh, let's do a new bird and do something at Johnson. It's either do a project at Bird just for Bird or do a consolidated school. Those are the 2 paths that we have to choose, and that path gets decided by how the school wants to move forward with enrollment. What we've talked about so far in this project, we've had multiple school committee meetings and building committee meetings where the enrollment has been discussed. School committees had a couple focus groups with elementary school communities, one on November 5th, one on the 10th, where we presented all this information. We took a lot of questions. We're compiling a list of frequently asked questions or facts. A lot of them have to do with enrollment, how we came up with the numbers, how does enrollment affect the type of project that we might have, what does the school size look like, et cetera. And after tonight's meeting and round of questions, we'll get that finalized and up on the website. And then we're having tonight's forum where we're focusing specifically on questions related to enrollment. And then from a timing perspective, that decision or vote on which enrollment path to move forward is going to be taken by the school committee on December 10th. The reasoning there is that decision needs to be made so that the architects know which path to move forward with in order to come up with preferred solution options and eventually schematic design. Excuse me. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Goff.
Thanks, Brian. Good evening. For those of you that might not know my background, I've spent over about 25 years in the middle schools. And I've seen 5th grade transition into the middle schools, working with the elementary levels, and way back when was 4th grade, when we had actually had 5th grade at the elementaries. Coming into the middle schools, and then also working with our 8th graders, transitioning them to high school. So we've been working on this, I think, since back of 2016. So, a lot of work has been done, a lot of hard work. We still have a lot of work left to do. Like I said, it's hard work, but it's exciting work at the same time. So we're really continuing and want to make sure that we get community input as we continue through this process and this journey. The visioning work we participated in, and then also our visits to several newly built middle schools, really provided us with the opportunity to ask questions and really view effective curriculum models, and also building designs, just so we can gather some data on some organizational strategies. And when we were looking at some of the perceived advantages and disadvantages of a consolidated middle school, and first and foremost, when you look at advantages, is equitable access. And what do we mean by equitable access? Well, we mean that each student receives the resources and the educational opportunities in order to learn and thrive. So it's an equitable, for example, allocation and use of resources, right, to create experiences that really enable our students to reach their learning outcomes. So when you have a consolidated middle school, you have 100% of your students benefiting from a new facility versus 50% of your students. It also means equitable access to programming and learning environments. So for example, at present, neither Bird nor the Johnson middle school facilities really provide our students and families with this type of flexible and what you would call technology rich, dynamic learning environments that they deserve. So if you're combining the schools, it provides all of the middle school students with this improved and more equitable opportunities to benefit from the state-of-the-art learning environment for decades to come. Another example is technology. Combined, you have 100% of students that benefit from new technology and infrastructure, that you have these spaces where you have ubiquitous technology. We say ubiquitous of, where you need it, when you need it. To be able to have labs where students are exposed to software development or coding, application strategies, where your middle school news teams can access, or your robotics. performance areas, athletic facilities, dining commons, indoor, outdoor learning spaces. Safety is another. 100% of students would benefit from an entry access, for example, and controlled building-wide monitoring spaces, so increase of cameras. But safety also includes providing this adequate and appropriate located space for support services. So you have outside providers who can provide needed mental health support for our students. And then you also have improved and more equitable access to student services. We know that Walpole Public Schools is committed to providing these educational experiences for students in the least restrictive environment. And having all middle school in-district special education programs in one building, that helps maximize your service and enables greater flexibility with regard to the delivery of student services. So it provides that expanded sense of community and builds a stronger learning environment. So right now, some of our special education students have to leave their neighborhood school due to the building program location. So in this respect, it's one school because we have one neighborhood. And speaking of neighborhoods, just looking at that second bullet, it's creating this neighborhood and teaming model to get this small school feel. And you create characteristics of a small school feel in a larger building. When writing the ed plan, I think the term grade level neighborhoods was in there 80 times, and teaming was about 140 times in there. So the middle schools, as you know, that are really committed to this inclusive environment that values teaming. Teaming is at the heart of our middle school philosophy. So there has to be this sensitive understanding of specific middle level neighborhoods that promotes this environment where students and our parents and our community members can really come together with its environment of enthusiasm and academic excellence and social exchange. So you would have classroom neighborhoods that would be organized by grade level, and that supports that team-based approach. So for example, each grade level neighborhood would house 3 grade level teams. You'd have 6 grade level teams containing approximately 100 students each. So that classroom neighborhood would be able to serve their own centers for learning. They would create a variety of spaces that support groupings, collaborations, small group work. And the neighborhoods contain 4 general education classrooms, science classroom, STEAM classroom, that's science, technology, engineering, art, math spaces, and just opportunities for students to work together and to collaborate. Your special education programs, your student support services, all of that's an inherent part of that neighborhood. So really what it does is it creates this feeling of home so that students are comfortable and safe, and sending the message that they're part of a small learning community, which in turn is connected really to the fabric of a larger school. You have an improved ability to team teach because, like I mentioned, teaming is at the heart of the middle school philosophy. So your programming, as I mentioned, is delivered within this grade level academic team. Currently, we have some teams that are composed of multi-grade levels. For those of you that may be familiar with middle school or had children go through the middle school, we've had this called split teams. So based on enrollment, you might have a grade 6 team, a 6-7 team, an 8 team. Another year, you might have a 7-8 team. This would eliminate that, this cross teaming, because it really contradicts the middle school philosophy and gives that benefit of a small learning community. And it also creates class sizes that would average in your low 20s, 20, 21, with this particular model. You also have improved ability for teachers and support specialists to collaborate, because if you enhance that teaming model, then what does that mean? You can collaborate with your support specialist and improve the instruction and student achievement. You can also, another benefit of consolidated middle schools is improving your school programming and related arts offering. So you have a combined middle school that allows you to utilize your efforts to have a robust exploratory arts curriculum. Because due to the staff and space constraints in our current middle school, that our model is limited in capacity. So it allows these more program offerings during the day, but then also after school. For example, if you have in one school, a program may not run, an activity may not run because you have 8 students. But in another middle school, you may have another 8 students. But in a combined middle school, you have similar interest, and then you have enough students where you can run that particular program. Another important component is community access. The visioning sessions expressed a strong desire to build a facility that has community access. So a combined middle school will offer that improved access that allows these up-to-date amenities for our community stakeholders to use. It could be performance venues, multi-purpose gathering spaces, specialized classrooms, athletic spaces, outdoor learning areas. So in essence, the school can provide a space safely, because it would just be one section, so that could be locked down, to be used by the community. Could be after school, could be evening, on the weekends, during the summer months. So your auditorium, your gym, your CAF. Right? And then finally, student diversity. We all know that when you have more students, so in this essence, a combined middle school, it enables students to experience greater diversity among other students and staff. You have your cognitive, social, and emotional education and benefits of a diverse classroom, and students from different backgrounds and perspectives. And we know that school diversity really prepares our students for a global society and allows them to take on leadership qualities that helps us to collaborate and think critically and problem solve. And also to participate in civic activities that result from a diverse learning experience. We all know that through all this that we've seen some perceived disadvantages. And I'm going to have Bill Hahn just talk a little bit about that before I get into the increased enrollment piece.
Thank you, Dr. Goff. We know that if the town of Walpole supported a consolidated school, a concern that many prospective parents and community members have shared with us is the idea of going from 2 smaller schools to 1 larger average-sized middle school. So we wanted just to address some of that. Something that has been incredibly important to our design options and to the architecture team has been including characteristics of a small school within our design. So many of the things that Dr. Goff already touched upon, designing neighborhood teaming models, providing a schedule that allows students to have an intimate experience within their teams, is all aspects to our design and to our educational planning that will be included to ensure that we have a school that is the characteristics of a small school. Even though a consolidated school in this case wouldn't even be considered a large middle school, this was crucial to us in our visioning and design process in each step that we've taken in our models.
Thanks, Bill. So if you go to the next slide, Brian, that's the enrollment Bill had just mentioned. So if you're able to take a look at that, I know some of the numbers are small. You can see Walpole in there, Byrd and Johnson, and that the average middle school in Eastern Massachusetts is 900 students. So looking at that, you can see where we fit in communities, taking a look at our communities that are similar to Walpole. So you can actually see there's 2 schools in Lexington, and they're both in the 900s. And then below us you have Easton. You can see Hingham of 999 students. So just looking at where 900, I think it's helpful to see people to see in terms of enrollment for people, where we would stand. And again, as Bill mentioned, it's having the characteristics of a small school feel in a larger building. And I think with that, I'll introduce Principal Andy Zatoli, who I think has the next series of slides, who is the principal in middle school in Natick. And this is a brand spanking new middle school that is opening next month, I think, Andy, and that's a picture of the school. And we were very fortunate to be able to visit this school recently, just several weeks ago, to take the tour. And that was one of the things I was impressed with, the small school feel, as well as the architecture of the building and how it was designed. And that's what Andy's going to talk about, the small characteristics of in a larger school. So I'll turn it over to you, Andy.
Thank you, Dr. Goff, Mr. Hahn, for allowing me to speak tonight. Just a very, very quick introduction. I taught at Byrd. I actually went to East Junior High, if you're old enough to remember that. And I actually taught for 10 years at Byrd Middle School. And then the last 24 years, I've been a middle school principal. So I've spent my whole life in the middle school. And I think generally it's not necessarily an age that we think very graceful of. You know, very rarely do you hear someone say, geez, I'd like to go back and be in 7th grade again. You know, it's usually they love their 2nd grade teacher or their high school teacher that gave them great inspiration going to college. And we realize that it is a tough age for kids. And we've spent the last 25 years making that middle school experience good for kids. And if we've learned anything at all, that deeper learning will not occur without a significant positive relationship. That's the social emotional piece. You know, we hire teachers that really enjoy this age, number one, but understand that we all, you know, Walpole's doing it, Natick's doing it. We're making this a place where I think middle school age children feel loved, supported, included. You have to love it to do it. And I know you have people in Walpole that love it, but I want to share a couple of things that we do in Natick that to try to build that feeling of connectivity and relationship building. You know, other than sort of supporting the culture that principals do, those key relationships start with the teacher, start on that team. And we started to look about 4 years ago at that portrait of what a graduate of Natick High School should look like when they leave. And that was about 4 years ago. In the last couple of years, we started to look at what would that portrait be of a teacher, of a great teacher. And I feel there's 3 parts of it. There's the teacher needs to understand the social emotional needs of the age group. And they build that into their lessons. It's more than just greeting kids at the door or saying, how was your game? I'm sending the message as that great teacher. I care about you and I care about your learning. That's first and foremost. And we like to, in Natick, we refer to that teacher as the warm demander. They understand social emotional needs of the age group. They have great mastery of their content, and they use best practice to deliver it. That would be that portrait of a great teacher. And I know there are some in Walpole. I know some of them. We have them in Natick, and that's our job to sort of get teachers to that level first and foremost. So I think it starts right there, just building that great capacity from your teachers. You can go to the next slide. Another thing that a lot of schools do, and we do it, and we call it our advisory. Twice a cycle, which roughly is twice a month, every single teacher, administrator meets with 6 to 8 students. And I put some of the things that we did: goal setting, problem solving, community service, letter writing, games. Sometimes I start out with my group and I'll just say, tell me what worries you about being in the middle school. And we have discussions about that. End of the day, we want every single child in our building to have a trusted adult in that building. I have them, granted this, you know, when we open up that new school at about 8:50, we want every single child in that building to feel connected. Without the connection, the learning doesn't take place, first and foremost. I also put down some of the clubs that we run. This is our after school program. And I know they do these in Walpole as well. And we usually run about 20 at a time, everything from art to drama to sports, music. Our drama program attracts about 150 students every time we put on a play. We have robotics. We have a gay straight alliance group. We want every child to fit in, and we allow the kids to sort of come and go. You know, if I start in the art group, I don't like it and I want to switch to drama, I can do that, or I can be in the leadership club. It's just one more small way that children feel connected to their school. couple other things, and I'll just run through them quickly, and I'm sure they're happening. You know, and Dr. Goff mentioned you give each team a name, you create that smaller community. It gives children an identity in their school. Our response to intervention, where we work with our low readers and our low math students with a highly qualified teacher that really understands their needs. Ms. Goff talked about a centralized location, sort of a home base for students. A lot of the transition nights, open houses, making parents feel comfortable where their children go to school. All our teams do a fall team building activity. Some of the grades take their kids to a ropes course. They do these things right at the beginning of the year to get to know their kids, and children who might come from different schools get to know each other. We do a whole school behavioral plan, reward kids, when their behavior is excellent. We have one counselor per grade that travels with children the whole 3 years, so they really get to know that child and their family. We do reverse inclusion, where our kids go into some of our more needier children's classrooms, and they help them so they become very accepting of those children. We have an academic support, skills development for us children that need extra support, again, with teachers highly qualified, so that they feel successful at school. And that's a lot of what it's all about. Lastly, we have case management, which is our social worker, our guidance counselors, our admin team. And when we know families are in need of our services, we problem solve and do everything from get food for families to glasses for children and everything in between. And that's it. Thank you.
Bridget, anything you want to add? Follow up to Andy?
No, I think that's great. Thank you, Andy.
You're welcome.
All right. And I'll transition. The other big aspect of looking at it, whether or not to consolidate, would obviously would be the financial aspect. Obviously, a much bigger project for the town to take on. And we've been looking at different aspects of this as well from a project perspective, advantages, disadvantages. Some of the advantages of a consolidated project, and it's somewhat counterintuitive sometimes, is the construction value. And we'll get into a little bit more detail related to that. And it's not necessarily cost, but the value. So what you're getting for that cost, and what that value means on a couple different levels, meaning deferred cost implications of, okay, if you just do one project, you obviously are deferring another project, in this case, the Johnson. And what does that look like, down the road in the future for Walpole? What are the implications of working with the MSBA? With the MSBA is giving the town an opportunity now to look at a bird project or a combined project. How does that translate into a potential future Johnson project? And we'll get into some of that detail in a little bit. Other possible advantages of a combined school or some operational efficiencies, and that doesn't necessarily mean staff. That just means maintenance around the school, being able to consolidate resources as far as upkeep of only one building, those types of things. And something about staff that's still being played out. I know that's also a concern that people raise. Whereas, you're consolidating schools, so you'll eliminate teachers into that, and that's not necessarily the case. Based on the programs that become offered at a school, you're still teaching the same amount of kids. You might be offering more programs, more specialized programs, more extracurricular type activities where the staffing needs, remain stable or change in a different way. So we're looking at all those options. Utility utilization efficiencies, obviously with a newer building, one building, it's much more energy efficient, better use of utilities versus having, either a renovated building and then an older building still online somewhere. And then deferred maintenance costs. And this means, what are the capital projects that the school department and the town have to take on each year related to the existing middle schools? So obviously, if you repair or expand one of them, you still have Johnson that has ongoing maintenance issues, whether it's roof, heating systems, windows, whatever it is down the road. Obviously, in a combined new building, that building has a lifespan of 10, 15 years, 20 years before you have any major type of improvements that you need to do. The major disadvantage, obviously, or perceived disadvantage of a combined school is it's a larger upfront investment. It's a larger upfront cost. But again, it's that word cost versus value. So yes, it's a bigger project for the town to take on at this point. but is it a better value over time? And that's something we'll look at in a little bit more detail. So a quick analysis and looking at a consolidated bigger school, and we're using conceptual cost estimates that we came up with in the first stage. It was submitted to the MSBA, and these are very high level costs at this point, based on square footages that come out of the programming exercises that we do with the school. And we looked at a bunch of different options. Basically, the two solution paths for a consolidated school are either adding and renovating one of the existing schools, whether it's the Byrd or the Johnson, to create the square footage that you need to house both schools, so the total enrollment in updating one of the existing buildings, or building a brand new building that will house the total enrollment. So there's two paths, basically four different basic options. And those price ranges for total project costs were in the $114 to $126 million range. And that includes everything: design fees, construction fees, project contingencies, furniture, swing spaces for students if you're doing a ad reno in one of the building, etc. In contrast, if you look at just adding or renovating or building a brand new single school for the Byrd, those total project costs were in the $82 to $95 million project. So again, square foot costs of school construction these days can be upwards of $600 a square foot or more. When you start talking about the space you need to house some of the programs, to meet some of the teaming models that the ed program wants to be delivered in, you're talking about creating almost additional square footage to get that done in a single building, whereas you're losing some of the efficiencies of a combined building. So a single school is roughly an $82 to $95 million project all in. If you assume the same cost for a separate Johnson project, roughly the same square footage is required. Again, another $82 to $95 million roughly, for a total combined cost of $164 to $190 if you did these two projects individually. But these two projects aren't on the same timeline. Obviously, the Byrd is farther along. If you were to, in theory, approve a Byrd-only project and then want to do a Johnson project and start next year, get that in the pipeline with a design, on a track to get to a town meeting to approve that funding, you're probably at least 2 years out to really start a Johnson project following a Byrd project, if you don't want the MSBA to be involved. And then escalation of construction costs at roughly 5% a year, would put the Johnson project roughly two years behind the Byrd project, at a roughly 5 to 10% escalation of costs. And now you're talking the Johnson project is more along the lines of a $90 to $105 million project. So two individual schools at the end of the day could end up costing the town $172 to $200 million to do them individually, versus what we're thinking now would be $115 to $126 million. So again, that's that initial upfront cost to the value of maybe waiting to do another project down the road. And there's even more benefit when you look at it from in working with the MSBA. So the district is taking several years to get accepted into the MSBA project pipeline. Right now, the MSBA is talking about possible a reimbursement percentage to the town of Walpole of around 48%. However, not all costs in the MSBA project are deemed to be eligible and therefore eligible for reimbursement. So what we found in the past years is that actual realized reimbursement from the MSBA tended to be a little bit lower, possibly 15% lower. So for this conversation, we're assuming an actual realized reimbursement of about 35%. So we take that consolidated middle school that we talked about on the previous slide, and 35% reimbursement from the MSBA, again, could be higher, could be slightly lower, is roughly $40 to $44 million of that total project cost. So at the end of the day, the town of Walpole would be responsible for funding roughly $74 to $82 million of a new consolidated building for the entire middle school enrollment. If the town decides just to do a Byrd-only project, which is an option, either add or renovate the existing Byrd or build a brand new Byrd for that price range of 82 to 95, 35% of reimbursement from the MSBA just for that project is roughly 28 to 33 million. Then you want to do a Johnson project, as we talked about, within the next 2 years without the MSBA's help, pay for the full cost at 82 to 95. The total cost of the town with some reimbursement from the Byrd project is roughly 136 to 157. However, if you want to wait for MSBA reimbursement on the Johnson project, The issue is that the MSBA does not accept a district into the program if they have a major project already ongoing. So in this case, they wait for the projects to finish before considering another project. So roughly at this point, there's about 4 years left on the BIRD project between design and construction. And then you're roughly 4 years into the BIRD project already with the MSBA as far as submitting a statement of interest, going through an eligibility period, which has been explained in previous forums, and then doing the feasibility study phase that we're in right now that gets us to town meeting next fall. Excuse me. So roughly 8 years. So you're basically 8 years away today from doing a Johnson project with MSBA reimbursement. And assuming that a Johnson project would get the same reimbursement rate as the BIRD project at 35%, you see the math here. The cost of BIRD with reimbursement today, the escalated cost of doing the Johnson project 8 years from now with reimbursement from the MSBA puts you at about 129 million. So as you can see, from a financial perspective, although the initial cost is more to the town initially, the value of getting that brand new building that could possibly house the total enrollment is a better value at a consolidated project. However, that's an option the town will need to choose moving forward. So that's all we have tonight as far as the major questions that we've been seeing related to whether we go with a single school or whether we go with a consolidated school is how does that affect education program in the student experience and how much does it cost? There are other questions that we have been receiving and we'll answer tonight, but to stay informed and stay involved, we have a project website. I think you've seen this before. We're updating that with all the recent presentations, including the last building committee that actually had some of the initial concepts. There's a handout there with project summaries. And then we also loaded the video of the existing BIRD middle school. That way people can actually take a look at that. There's a link to the MSBA and then also the email address. The next big date for everyone to keep in mind is the upcoming school committee meeting on the 10th, which will be the vote on enrollment. So all the information that you're gathering tonight, that you've gathered in previous forums, will all be brought up at the school committee on the 10th when they decide which way to move forward. With that, I want to thank you on behalf of the panel, and we'll open it up to more questions.
So I do have a few questions. One question that came into the question and answer box was, if it's only chosen to upgrade or renovate the BIRD Middle School, what does that mean for the Johnson staff and students? I did give
I know,
initial.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to unmute myself. Does anybody want to take this from any of the middle school principals, or if not, I can take it. I know I don't want to put Mr. Morganwith on the spot, who happens to be the principal at Johnson Middle School, so it might be appropriate for him to, and then I can jump in, Steve.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, no, the reality is that you were talking about in a consolidated school, you're going to have twice the number of students in the same facility. We're still going to have the need for teaching, for the same amount of teaching staff and other support staff as well. So I think that, there are some areas where you might be able to find some parity in staffing. But for the most part, the folks who work over at Johnson would have a spot at the consolidated building as well. It's also going to allow us some opportunities to find some new and creative ways of teaming and staffing as well, to use our staff more efficiently, more effectively.
Thanks, Steve. That's what I was going to piggyback on, that you can create more opportunities too as well when you look at your staffing.
Yeah, Tony, and looking at that question too, I think they were also asking about, what happens if you just do the BIRD only project?
Yeah, so I'm just taking the question and answer box one. So from a procedural standpoint related to the MSBA, like Brian mentioned, if there was a desire to do a renovation or something at the Johnson separately, then you would have to with the MSBA all over again, which does lead to, I'm going to take the chat questions next. which does
Tony, you actually froze during that last answer. Would you mind repeating that answer?
Oh, no, I was saying, from just a project procedure standpoint, if the town went forward with a bird-only school, at this phase, they would have to complete that project and then, start the application process again with the MSBA to be considered for the second project. Because like Brian mentioned, they don't do consecutive separate projects. So the opportunity is to do bird or a consolidated school. This actually is a good segue to the chat questions. Someone asked, it seems like that there's a recommendation to do consolidated. The question is, can the school be built, a consolidated school, if an override vote is voted down? And I'm assuming that that's no, from a funding standpoint. Mike could probably take this a little further. But I think you need the funds in order to do a project of this size, but I'll let Mike continue if he has something to add.
Yeah, that's correct, Tony. I mean, you would need the override to fund a project of that magnitude. We do not have that kind of funding within the regular town budget, so it would be override dependent.
Right. This is actually a really good question. This is a follow-up question to this initial question. So we've established that you do need a town vote, override vote to get this project pulled off. The second part of the question is, would the town still have time with the MSBA to put a second override vote together if the consolidation vote failed for just a bird-only project? And I'm probably would let Tim answer this one if he's on the forum, but I think the short answer is probably yes, but we would have to ask the MSBA for an extension of some time to be able to get to the next town meeting and then put a whole campaign together for a bird-only vote.
Let me just clarify that. So can you guys hear me? So if a vote fails, you have a certain amount of time. I think it's 120 days to propose a new project to the MSBA. The problem with this situation, and why this is not realistic that you'd propose a new single bird, say, only, would be that you still have to design the 30% design that somebody mentioned. You still have to do that to know what that project would cost and to know what the MSBA would fund. So you would probably exceed that 120 days to be able to do that. So I think in this particular case, that's probably not realistic to assume you'd be able to go back to the MSBA. But, you know, we would always try to do what we could to rescue a project, but I don't think people should count on that.
Yeah, the scenario of the 120 days typically is, you know, you have a project where, you know, maybe the price tag of a project is a little too steep for a town meeting, or there's something that, you know, conceptually that is off and, you know, it gets voted down and it's something that can be corrected on basically the same project. And you might have an opportunity to maybe tighten up a budget or, you know, chop off some scope. And you can turn that around relatively quickly versus maybe going down a totally different solution path within that 120 days. And then the ramification is if you are not able to do that, the MSBA basically closes the project and the town would have to reapply through a statement of interest to get back into the project.
Right, plus you still have all the consolidation votes that were actually taken. So, all right, I'm going to move on to this next question. The next question is, who votes next fall? RTMs at town meeting, or is there a separate town-wide residents vote?
There's two votes.
It'll be both.
So there's a town meeting vote by town meeting members to appropriate the money, and then there's a debt override, a debt exclusion, general vote, ballot vote to comply, to authorize a debt exclusion over to Proposition 2.5. So there are two votes. There's a 2/3 vote at town meeting to appropriate, and then there's a simple majority vote at the ballot, townwide ballot.
One of the next questions. At one time, I thought there was talk of building a new high school and combining the two middle schools into the current high school. Is that no longer an option? Maybe Bridget, you could talk
Yeah.
to this one, or
I'm
Nancy?
glad somebody brought that up because I think we need to, always make sure that we clarify that at every meeting. So thank you for that reminder. That is correct. We are not building a new high school and moving the two middle schools into the high school. The high school was not an option for MSBA. The MSBA, through the statement of interest or the SOI, accepted Bird Middle School into the pipeline with, or what we could do is go with a consolidated middle school. So those were our two choices. The high school is not an option. I don't know if there's anybody else that wanted to add to that.
And I think to clarify, I think initially there were statement of interest. Some of the ones that were rejected by the MSBA did have a high school element to it.
Correct.
And I think from the MSBA's perspective, at least in our experience, those types of projects are extremely complicated, where you're now talking about basically moving everyone around the district and building projects. And they tend to make you narrow your focus a little bit more. So there were previous statements of interest that included high school scope that were rejected, but the one that was accepted was middle school enrollment only.
But thank you for asking that.
The next two questions are related to cost of the comparable school at Natick. I'm going to read one that gets into a little more detail. Natick voted for $110 million of funding of the new middle school, but actual cost came in at $79 million. If true, congrats on that. Can you cite why the final cost was so much lower than the projection? I suspect that this is probably construction cost versus project cost, but Brian, can you have up-to-date numbers, or if Andy wants to take this one?
I'll take it. I'm actually the project manager on the Natick Middle School project as well. So yes, Natick approved $110 million for the middle school project that was approved by the MSBA. The $79 million are the construction costs. So the construction bid for just the construction of the building came in at just under $79 million. The total project cost, which also includes contingency for the owner and for change orders during construction, is $105 million. So under the $110 million budget that was approved, it came in under budget. But the total project budget right now is $105 million.
I just wanted to encourage people to continue to log questions in the chat box, because we will definitely get to all of them. We have two questions that are slightly related about locations of possible consolidated schools. Both are asking similar things. Would the new consolidated school be built at Bird? Would it replace Bird, or would it be at a new location? Maybe if we want to get Chris involved in the forum, maybe he could take this one. Chris Blesson is your architect from TAP A. He's leading the team of the designer and their consultants.
Yeah, thanks. So we've been looking at options for sites, and the first look at that was to look at the Bird site, where we did test fits for both a combined school on the Bird site and a single school that housed the 450. So both student populations we looked at on the Bird site, and then we looked at a handful of other sites in town. And we did a matrix, and that's part of the PDP documents that I think will be made available to the public, but that we did a matrix to look through some other sites. And so the short way to say that is that most of them were rolled out for various reasons, and the only other site that we're looking at right now is the Johnson site. And so the Johnson site's actually pretty large and has a fair amount of space up behind. So the VFW post is right there next to it, and then there's land behind that and to the I think it's north of that post, and so that land is actually pretty well suited. We got some early geotechnical reports back, and so that land, and then on the Bird, those are the two spots where we're looking at being able to house the combined school right now. So
Yeah, so basically we started with quite a few sites that were town owned. That got narrowed down to about 6 sites, including 2 of the farms, the town forest. Because of regulatory reasons, now we're down to on some of those other sites in a condensed history of the search. Like Chris said, we're down to Bird and Johnson. The Johnson part of the site is that higher side of the site behind the VFW. And then we have a couple of alternatives of Bird locations on different places of the Bird site. I think that whole answers this next question about, does the town already have land available for a combined school, or would they be required to purchase land? The nice thing about the 2 sites, Bird and Johnson, is they're already an educational use and they're zoned for that. So the town really wouldn't have to purchase or do any conveyance to get a project on those 2 sites. This is a very good question and something that we've talked a lot about in the project team group. This question is, will a Bird only, which is a no consolidation option school, result in a Walpole have or have not scenario? Depending on where you live, your student will get to go to the new school or the old school. So maybe Bridget or Nancy.
Pretty much it.
That's come up quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, if you only have Bird that's renovated, or a new school, let's say, that neighborhood would go to that school. And Johnson would be left with the school that they currently have.
So,
Bridge, can I just add to that?
Sure.
Since I'm in the middle of it, it would clearly make some inequalities. Clearly.
Can I also add, this is Nancy Gallivan, can I also add that we would never just leave Johnson and say, oh, well, we did the best we could for half of the town. We would continue to try to bring a project forward. The problem is, as Brian pointed out, it would take a number of years before we would eventually get to that, and the total cost spent would be greater in the end, but we would never just be satisfied with half the town receiving one kind of education and the other half having a lesser experience.
thank you, Nancy. Yeah, it's a topic we've talked quite a bit about, not just on this project, but on other projects like Andy mentioned. We do have another question. What did Natick do to rally the community to pass the override? I was actually still engaged in the project at this point. We did do those traveling road shows, which was similar to this. In Walpole, the school committee, under Nancy and Bridget's guidance, has already had a couple of smaller focused parent groups meetings with. These are the real stakeholders, the people whose students would probably be one of the first groups in the school. So I know that the school committee has started their efforts on that, but short of flyers, word of mouth, good communication, this project website is a huge informational tool. And for those who haven't seen some of the options that are being put forward as possible options, we will load that document that that Brian was referring to earlier, that we submitted, the preliminary design design program, because it does have those options and breaks out the ed plan that Bridget was referring to earlier. It doesn't seem like we have any other questions, so maybe I'll do one last call for any.
Tony, there's a bunch in the general Q&A.
All right, so
Yeah.
so I'm going to close the chat box, and then we can take the live question and answer questions.
It looks like I'll add to that last question too. I mean, as far as rallying before the override, I mean, the public communication will ramp up this summer, heading into fall prior to town meeting. Once we actually have the schematic design phase complete and we kind of have the whole package together with the MSBA with the real numbers for the project. It's not unusual for us, the project team, the working group, the building committee, to be out in front as many civic organizations as possible to get the word out, take people's questions and kind of continue this effort, but even in a more, ramped up pace. So people will start paying attention closer to town meeting. That's the way it always happens. And we'll be in front of, whatever group, whatever media we need to distribute information through, we'll be doing that. But there will be a very coordinated and substantial effort leading into town meeting. There's one
I'm gonna
last.
go to the question and answer questions now.
Yeah, one last one came on the chat. How does the town plan? How does the town plan to cover the remaining costs? So the MSBA will reimburse a portion of that. The town has to approve the funding for the entire project. And then what ends up happening as the project moves along, the project submits expended costs into the MSBA. The MSBA reviews them and then sends reimbursement checks back to the town. But to answer your question is whatever that reimbursement amount is determined to be, that'll happen as the project moves forward through design and then through construction. But the town will have to fund the remaining costs through the override, obviously as part of the town's debt budget. All right, Tony.
Yep. If we go with one school, safe to assume that the school project could partly be funded with the gains of the sale of the other school property, or would that remain town property and be used for other purposes? Do you want me to take this one? Or if we, I think what they're saying is maybe if they go with consolidated, maybe try and sell the other school. But I don't think that works into the MSBA's process. And I think that the town is planning to retain the property and not sell it and maybe repurpose for other uses. Next question, does the estimated cost for the consolidated middle school account for any construction costs associated with reuse or demolition of the Johnson Middle School building and possible site improvements? I might let Chris take this one, but I don't think our current conceptual costs include any actual work to the Johnson School at this point, right, Chris?
Right. So consolidated school, either on the Bird site or on the Johnson site, both have taken into account some level of demolition of the Bird school, because that's the school that the MSBA is funding. And so it doesn't have to be that way, but we were trying to build some costs in for what might be alternative options for that building once the new building is brought online. And so again, and it kind of goes in hand with the question just before this about, whether you sell the property or reuse it or something like that. There's going to be a robust process for that ultimately. And I think the select board and ultimately town meeting as voters would have to weigh in on what the options are. And so I don't think that we're going to come up with the final answer on that yet, but there are some costs and monies set aside just to capture some options, to leave options on the table for that in the future.
Right. The conceptual costs that we do at this phase are not very detailed because the design itself hasn't gotten to a point. So it's so Paul, if we've answered your question, hopefully we have. If not, you could maybe ask a follow-up question just to make sure we got to the bottom of that question. The next question from the question and answer box is the assumption that Walpole will have roughly the same middle school enrollment in 2024 when this project is completed. How do you plan for expansion contraction of the student population? Does someone on the team want to talk about the MSBA's process and their projections?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about
Okay,
that, and then
thanks,
someone
Bridget.
can fill in after. So as part of the deliverables, the team had to submit it's called an MSBA enrollment projection application. And that included data that's reported by the district. So that's as well as data reported by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education and actually the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. So the school department works in conjunction with the town administration. So it's really a comprehensive report that includes the past 10 years of enrollment from K to 12, future enrollments, future building permits, actually past and projected, residential developments, housing sales, the collaboratives in our area, even our out of district students, our private students, births, all these baseline projections. So there's a lot that goes into that enrollment, and that's where we got the number that we did for a combined middle school. I don't know if anybody else
And it
has.
goes out 10 years. It's designed to go out about 10 years.
And for capacity, the discussion that we had earlier for the combined school having class size that's roughly about 20 students, it means you have some built-in capacity there to accommodate bubbles or, ebbs and flows in that enrollment. It's not going to be precisely 905 forever, so, just if you take the rough numbers, just saying if we have 45 classrooms in the building and you added 2 students to each classroom, which is still a manageable class size, you've accommodated a bubble of 90 students right off the bat. So I think that the building has built-in capacity to accommodate some of those ebbs and flows. So.
All right, thanks everyone. Those were really good comprehensive answers. The next question is, who decides consolidated school versus a single school update? And like we talked a little bit about tonight, I guess ultimately the town will decide at the ballot. But before that, the school committee will obviously take a vote whether a consolidated school would work for the educational visioning plan of the town. And then the building committee would vote, hopefully in a representative way of what the town wants. Does anyone else want to take that further? Or? Essentially, the town does, and the town's representative. So it's not decided as of yet. So keep coming to these forums and get your feedback, provide your feedback. The next question is, where would the location be for the new building? There are 2 options at this point for a new building location, and that would either be either at various locations on the Bird site or the upper portion of the Johnson site, not the field, the lower field, not the current location of the site, but a fairly undeveloped part of the Johnson existing site behind the VFW, kind of in a wooded area. Those are pretty much the options that we are recommending at this point after completing the preliminary design program. Does anyone want to add to that? Or this is a really good question. If money is not a constraint, that would be so great. Would you still consider building 1 middle school instead of the 2 schools? And I'm going to answer this question with basically just focusing the conversation at the outset about timing. With the timing that you have of doing either the one project and then applying and redoing it, from the standpoint of being able to obviously service all 905 students right away as quickly as possible, I still think there's a strong case to be made for, if money was no object, would you do a big one for that reason? Anybody else want to add to this?
I would add that our educational vision for the students of Walpole would be enhanced through a consolidated building in terms of, again, the shared resources, staff opportunities to work together, to collaborate, to provide more programs for our students. And so it's not really a matter of trying, having a more cost-effective option, the consolidation really does fit with our goals and our vision for education for Walpole students.
Steve, I would agree with that because I went from a 500 student school to now that'll be about 850. I found more resources, more support for children. I feel frankly like I'm less in the trenches than I was before, but the kids are getting support from psychologists and highly trained guidance counselors and adjustment counselors. I think that having that kind of support outweighs more kids, believe it or not. It was a little surprising to me at first when I took the job in Natick.
All right, so
Nancy, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, did have a couple of thoughts. As a school committee member, I felt like we needed to look at this from an educational and a social emotional point of view. My instinct was that there was going to be a financial argument that said it might be better to consolidate, but I felt like it was our job to really explore the educational and the social emotional point of view. And I saw a number of things that I think point to why a school of the size that we're talking about in the 900 range would be valuable. I think that, first of all, it would address the needs of all of our students and wouldn't leave a set waiting for their turn 8, 9, 10 years later. But I also think that, as Andy was just saying, if you have a pool of 250 to 300 students in a grade, it allows for a lot more scheduling opportunities. It allows for a lot more individualizing to a certain extent, or differentiating is probably a better word. Because what you would end up with is 3 teams per grade. And that means if mid-year, for some reason, a student needed to be rescheduled, there are scheduling opportunities that just don't exist today. I also think that sometimes you need to, from a social point of view or an emotional point of view, a student needs to be moved away from a particular group of kids. You would have another team to put that child on, or in a more positive vein, kids can find their group if the group is large enough. If in the school right now, we try really hard to make sure that kids fit in, but as Andy was talking about and Bridget was talking about, middle school is a challenging time for kids. And I think the size of that we're talking about creates greater opportunities. I also think that teachers can benefit tremendously from having somebody who's teaching the same subject area that they're teaching in the building with them. It's great to have that new energy from a brand new teacher who just came out with great technology skills and some cutting edge ways of teaching a subject, but there's nothing like having a veteran to work beside them. So I saw that as another advantage. And then I mentioned a number of things in the social emotional range. I know that one concern that comes up with some parents is that they worry about their kid getting lost in the mix in a big school. And I think Andy did a great job of explaining how it's the culture that you create within the building, and the teams are the right size for students. There are enough so that they can have friendships, but not so much that they have to feel like they have to interact with the other 899 students in the school. So from my point of view, I think that the school committee really did feel the responsibility of looking at this from a non-financial point of view. We needed to get the financial information from Compass and TAPE, but we also needed to but I would do this regardless of money.
Thank you, Nancy. I'm just going to clarify something from the last comment in the question and answer to follow up Nancy's comment. The school committee is voting in December on this issue of enrollment, whether to do a consolidated enrollment or two separate schools. I think we said that ultimately that the town would decide this, and the first step of that is the school committee, their vote on December 10th. So back up to the questions.
Tony, can I just add something before you
Yep,
get off that?
absolutely.
Between now and December 10th, we do want to hear from the community. We want to hear what people have to say, but why also. There's a middle school project email that people can write to, or you can write to the school committee email, and that one is schoolcommittee@walpole.k12.ma.us. Any one of those things should be used, because we really do want to hear what the community has to say. I know that we've heard from some members of the community that they want to hear what the school committee members have to say also. That's why I chimed in when I did. But please reach out to us between now and December 10th with your opinions.
A few more questions. Thank you, Nancy. A few more questions. How large of a site is required for a combined school? Maybe I'll give this one to Chris.
Yeah, sure. So the combined school anyway is just shy of 175,000 square feet, which is approximately 4 acres in and of itself. And so then by the time you add in parking and all the sort of auxiliary things, outdoor classrooms and things like that, fields, if you're going to do that, you're probably looking in the neighborhood of like 8 to 10 acres minimum for a combined school. And that would probably even be a little bit tight, but we could probably work that out. So I think that all in, you're going to need somewhere in that neighborhood of, and the Bird side itself is 12 acres and the Johnson side is 54 acres. So that aligns with roughly what we've been showing in our test fits, that the new school would take up, a little about half the Bird site if we did it there. And so it's about, anywhere from, that puts it around 6 to 8, but so I'm going to say somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 acres or so.
Right. Slightly more detailed questions about the project. Where would the kids go during construction? Not all of the options that are being considered require disturbing the existing schools. I think the Johnson option up behind the VFW wouldn't really displace either of the schools during construction. There is an option that is in the PDP document that has a phased construction at Bird, and in that case, if students are displaced for any renovation of the existing, then swing space or like a modular setup would have to be used to accommodate the students. But I don't think we're at that point yet. We would have to know which project we're going with before being really able to answer that question of where the kids would go. In some cases, they wouldn't have to go anywhere, and in other types of projects, they would have to get relocated. There was another design question. Will Walpole use an existing design similar to Natick? Natick looked nice. Or would the consolidated schools start from scratch on its own? And just from the Natick standpoint, I know the Natick had very specific existing conditions with wetlands bordering on most sides of the site. So that building was a direct response to the site, that particular site. And that will also be the case here. I don't think we would be able to like take another design and kind of make it work on the site, on either site. So to answer that question, I think we would definitely be designing specific for Walpole and its needs and its site. I think this might be a good question to end on. Oh, someone asked about, are the 40B developments included? I think this pertains to the population growth. And I know that we talked about this in the project team, that the MSBA and their, in the questionnaire, it really addresses every single project that's on the books or potential. So I think that those 40B developments were included.
Yes, they were.
Yep. The question hoping that we can, that maybe we could end on would be, what is the best way to communicate how we would like the school committee to vote in regards to the preferred option? In other words, I think this question is asking, how can we communicate with the school committee on the enrollment topic? Mark?
I would say to email any and all of us, and certainly, communicate through your, say, your elementary school PAC perhaps, or, really start conversations in the community such that not necessarily any given individual, the person who asked the question, but the more people that are talking about this, the more people get back to us, the better off it is.
Anything else on that?
No, I
Nancy,
just want to add, like I mentioned before, that a lot of work has been done. It's hard work, but it's good work, and there's a lot of work still to be done, but it's exciting.
Oh, I may have lost Bridget.
I think she was just going to say that we're really grateful to have as many people attending. Oh, you're back, Bridget. You can finish now.
Of course, that's when the internet goes. It's probably going to still go again, but we'll see. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Just exciting time. We need to take advantage of this opportunity. We want as much feedback. Get your questions to us. I also encourage people to go on the website, the building project website, because there's great images of, like we said, of different design options, but also when reviewing the ed plan of what new middle schools look like. Especially there's some from that Compass has worked on, and as well as TAP A. They're both phenomenal entities, and we're very, very fortunate to have them working with us.
Anybody else? So I think everybody, thank you. I think that concludes our evening. And please, please, please start talking to your friends and neighbors about this. And please communicate with us as often as you feel the need. We need as much feedback as we can get.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.